Welcome back, everyone. It is 3 o'clock, and so we're going to get started on time so that we can get wrapped up and finished on time. But one of the conversations that we had at the break was about questions. And when we do new coordinator orientation in person, I'm told, since I've never got to do it in person, that there's usually a lot of questions. And so please, please, please don't hesitate to ask those. You can put your hand up and we can call on you. The easiest way is probably just put them in the chat box. And when we get to a good pause, we'll read out questions from the chat box and we can get those answered. So anything that you have questions on, please, please, please go ahead and ask them. And without further ado, we have budget and budget changes.
Yay. Just a few things start out about our budget. Just know that our fiscal year runs July 1st through June 30th. Any funds that we want to make sure that all of our funds are either encumbered or zeroed out by June 30th. They need to be, those funds that were encumbered should be paid out. Those final bills paid with that encumbered money by July 25th. Any funds that are not encumbered and at the end of June 30th, then that amount of money is deducted from your next year's allocation. So a lot of people hear, well, we have it'll carry over. It technically doesn't carry over. What happens is your allocation for the next year, when we send money to your district, we just reduce that amount of money by the amount that you didn't spend. So it is important that we always zero out our funds, have our money encumbered by June 30th, and then have those final bills from those funds that were encumbered paid by July 25th. It's the responsibility of the coordinator to manage the budget and to spend that money. They're the only ones that should spend the funds. We don't want if you were off for some reason, whether it be medical or family leave or whatever, that those funds are spent and you're not in your center in that role. So we always say that it's the coordinator's responsibility to spend the funds and to manage the budget, and they're the only ones that can present bills and invoices and so forth. Because your advisory council helps with budgetary planning and spending, then that is why we require you at each advisory council meeting to present that budget to your council. That's why we say, that, as you learned earlier today when they were going over advisory councils, that's why it is, one of the line items on the agenda at every meeting. We know that with your budget, the narrative details the narrative that goes along with your budget helps to give some ideas of guidelines. Those that are in those advisory council bylaws help give you guidelines on how to spend money in some of your codes. So like your basic needs, your emergency assistance, what you have in your food codes, money that you put in travel. Sometimes those bylaws have certain limits. You all talked about that earlier. So if you're only allowed to spend X number of dollars per activity, then, or a percentage of your overall budget is spent toward, food or whatever, those things can determine what your budget looks like. So that's why it's always important to make sure you're very familiar with your bylaws, that your bylaws are, that you understand what they are and they're manageable to you. How do we keep track of all of our money? Tanya is going to pull up and share the budget balance sheet. And we can take a look at that.
Okay, can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So on our webpage, we have a budget balance spreadsheet. This is a spreadsheet that was created by a coordinator, and we have used it for years. And really, what you're doing is balancing your checkbook. So I have filled this in with just the beginning balance that you have in your budget. And so what you would do is take this first tab, input your budget, and your munis codes, these are automated fields. When you type in 0130, the activity will show up. So put that in. And then a good way to do this, whenever you have an expenditure, let's say we are going to do a general supplies expenditure for 0160. So you see down at the bottom, you have tabs listed. This one is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Tab number 5, line item 5, click that. You can see this is general supplies, and you would put in Walmart. The date, the PO number, PO amount, whatever makes sense to you, and then the invoice amount. Let's say it's $250. PO amount was $275. And then you can see that you have a running balance here. You started out with $2,000, and in this line item, you now have $1,750 left. If you were to put another one in, invoice amount, let's say it's $125.54. And you can see that that balance will change. So you've just got a running balance. But if you go back to your budget, you can see that now in the general supplies line item, you started with $2,000. You've made $375 worth of expenditures, and this is your remaining amount for that line item. And so this is just a really helpful tool. Some people like to keep a hard copy and balance it just like a checkbook, but I think now most of us prefer an electronic means of balancing that budget. And
Can I ask two questions?
Sure.
The first question, I don't know if you said it or not. Are we able to get a copy of this balance sheet?
Yes, it is on the web page under forms and downloads, and you can pull it right off the web page. Although we may be able to put that elsewhere. I don't know if we're going to be sending information out to coordinators or not after NCO.
Okay, and the next question is, I haven't done any purchasing yet. Why was the purchase order and the invoice order two different amounts?
Because sometimes you'll say that you're going to have a purchase order. Your intention is to go spend $150 at Walmart. So the PO is for $150, but when you actually check out, you only spend $105. So the PO amount and the invoice amount can be different because most districts require that you have a PO in place before you actually do the purchase. So sometimes, things are on sale. You may get a discount, end up with a discount. So there are lots of times that your PO amount will be different than your invoice amount.
Thank you.
Any other questions about the budget balance spreadsheet?
I might have missed this, Tanya, but there was another question in the chat from Dustin about 10%. Did you see that? If you can't get zero, if you cannot zero the funds out, is it enough just to get within 10%?
Okay, there's a difference between your full entire allocation budget amount and then each line item code. So overall, by June 30th, we want the overall balance for your allocation to be zero or encumbered. For each line item, each munis code, when I say line item, I'm talking about each munis code, you can be 10% under or over the amount that from the zero. You don't have to each individual munis code be zero, but the overall budget would need to have a zero balance. And I know that's about as clear as mud, but you can in each line item spend over or under 10% without requiring a budget amendment. And when we say zeroing out at the end of the year, you will have some funds in each code. Each code will not line item zero out, but it's the overall budget, the overall allocation that we want to see zero, if that helps. What we require you to do is have some form of something like the budget balance sheet that Tanya just showed you. We want you to take that budget balance sheet, or if you're a really good person on Excel and you create your own Excel spreadsheet, or you do it by hand, you print off the sheets and you do it by hand, however you want to keep those records. But we ask that you reconcile that against the Munis report, that detailed journal Munis report. We want to see that you double check that you're making sure that there are no errors being made, that you are the sole responsible person as the coordinator for your center fund. So you want to make sure that you know at all times that the balances are, that bills have been paid, that you've submitted, and so forth. So that's why we ask that you always receive monthly Munis reports. Now, whether or not your district has or allows you to have desktop Munis and you can print your own reports off, then if that's not the case, then we ask that your districts provide them for you monthly. So if you'll flip the slide, Tanya, the one of the handouts that you have, and I don't have the new copy of the notebook that you all got, but the last one that I had, this was found in a copy of a Munis report, is actually in that section where the record keeping stuff was at. The handouts that we'll be going over were actually in that section, and I don't know if that got corrected with the new publication. But there is copies of Munis abbreviations, which you'll see on your screen. When you're reading a Munis report, sometimes it helps if you have an idea of what some of the jargon is on there, so to speak. They are difficult to read until you get used to them. But trust me, over time, it gets a lot easier. But if you'll notice on a detailed Munis report, when you see the abbreviation POE, then that stands for purchase order entry. So that's kind of like you've submitted for a purchase order. And then you'll have the API, the accounts payable invoice, or the activity was paid. I always think of API as it's applied. That means that they actually paid the bill. And then POL is purchase order liquidation. So that means they close the PO out. So what happens is when you submit for a PO in Munis, it's like it's 3 steps before that PO is closed out. You've submitted for the PO, the POE. They've actually applied it to an invoice, the API, and then the POL means that they've closed out that PO. So sometimes if you have a PO that's say $500, but the actual bill ended up being $450, then you will see that the API and the POL are different amounts, and the POE is the same as the POL. So like I said, it's something that as you have to deal with Munis reports, it does get a lot easier. You become more familiar with the terms. Anytime you see the BUA, that means there was a budget amendment. That means you've put in somebody in the finance office has had to change your budget amounts because you've had a budget amendment. POM, you'll see it's PO maintenance. Sometimes they've had to change the PO because a mistake was made. Sometimes you'll see a journal entry and I think it's JOU. So you know that they've had to come in and, like, if you've had a field trip, they sometimes will do those by just a journal entry since you didn't have a PO or anything for it. But here's copies. That's kind of what a Munis report looks like. That's just a summary report, as opposed to the next slide, which is your detailed journal report. And that's the one that you'll see some of those initials that we were just talking about on there. That is one that we want to make sure that you receive monthly, because that allows you to go back and do that reconciliation. Now, you're welcome to share the summary one with your advisory councils when you're having your advisory council meetings, or you can share your budget balance sheets. You can share a copy of those with your advisory council when you're given a budget report. Either one of those works. If you have a different ledger system, or you do the Excel spreadsheet and you just want to print that off, that too works for your advisory councils. And then I think somebody put in there that in the manual what the sections and the pages are. So if you want to check the chat box, that will tell you exactly where these are at. And then the next slide is we're going to be talking about amendments. So amendments, kind of mentioned this just a minute ago. When a munis code is of your most recent approved budget, if there's a change of 10% or $100, whichever is greater, then we require that you do a budget amendment. Anytime you're opening new munis codes, you know, that was not on that original budget, you'll need to do a budget amendment. And according to our contract, final budget amendments should be submitted to your RPM no later than 60 days prior to the end of the contract. So for us, that is April 30th because our contract ends June 30th. So that's why you will hear your RPM and people say, well, our deadline for budget amendments are April 30th. And that is be here in the next couple of months. So they'll be here before you know it. Then if you'll go on to the next slide. Quickly, just to mention also one of the things that your RPM needs to approve, and Tanya's going to go over a budget amendment and stuff here in just a minute once I talk about these two sections. So don't think we'll show you what it looks like on FRYSC counts. But the other thing that your RPM will approve is purchases. We ask that if you have any single item purchase of $500 or more, or goods or services contracts of $1,000 or more, that first of all, you get approval from your advisory council. And once that approval has been given, you fill out a request form where the advisory council chair signs, you as the coordinator signs off on it, and your district superintendent or designee, which is usually your district contact, signs it as well. So it'll have 3 signatures on it. And then you submit that to your RPM for final approval. So before you could make that those purchases, you would need to have that RPM approval. Same way with budget amendments. That's something that needs to be shared at advisory council. They approve those budget amendments. They have you sign the request. They sign the request form. The chairperson does for you. You sign it, and then your district level person signs it as well. But Tanya is going to demo a budget amendment in FRYSC counts for you and show you what it looks like.
And what I'm going to do, since we have the video already on the training hub, that is what I'm going to show you. It's about a 6.5-minute video. And so give me just a moment and I will pull that up and play it.
Hello, this is Tanya Cookendorfer with the Division of Family Resource and Youth Services Centers. I wanted to briefly demonstrate how to do a budget amendment. So the first thing you need to know about budget amendments is if you need to do a plain budget amendment with nothing else, you will click amend. If you will be doing an amendment with an associated purchase request or subcontract request, you can do those together. But also for that, you will click amend. If an amendment is required, you will click amend. If you're just doing a simple purchase request or subcontract request with no amendment, meaning the money is already built into your budget, you'll click request to do that request. So to demonstrate a simple amendment, you will see your latest approved budget highlighted in blue, and that is the only one where you have 3 options. So for this one, we will click amend. Confirm that that is what you want to do. And then the biggest mistake that we're seeing with budget amendments is this new budget column. For a budget amendment, you have to fill out every line item, and so not just the ones that you're changing. And as you do that, you will you'll see those the center allocation populating. So type in all of your amounts, and let's change this one to 700, and we'll put an extra 100 in here. So This is how you fill out your budget amendment. Now, what you see here at the bottom will be implemented next Wednesday, April 29th. So after 4 p.m., Wednesday, April 29th, you will see totals at the bottom, which should be helpful to you in doing amendments. And then you can see that your new budget matches your previous budget. And you'll also see the difference column. So if you're taking money out of one code and putting it in another code, you should see that difference balance at 0. When you're finished with that, click Save. And I should also mention, if you need to add another code, just click the Add Budget Activity button and it will add another code down here. You won't see any amount in previous budget, but you'll type your new amount in your new code under New Budget. So once you've saved, then you'll click the Request Form button and then Create Budget Request. This will allow you to fill out your amendment. So if you're just doing a plain amendment, the estimated cost will be 0. But if you're also including a purchase request or a subcontract request with this amendment, you will have an estimated cost. For this one, we're just going to do a simple amendment. Be sure when you type your explanation that your RPM knows exactly what you're doing. If you're adding a code, state what the code is, why you're doing it, what the amount is. Just be sure that your explanation or justification is very detailed. So when you finish that, click Save. And once you click Save, you'll see the Print button. And when you click Print, that will create a PDF version of the form that you just typed with signature lines. And so you'll take this form, you'll print it out, you'll sign it, get the other signatures, and as always, you will, when you get those back, you will scan it, and then you'll come back into FRYSC Counts. And so when you come back in after you've already gotten all your signatures, it's been scanned to your computer, you'll see that you now have an Amend 1 that's started. This is another common issue that we're seeing. People are creating multiple amendments. You don't want to click Amend. You've already started one, and you see that it's saved. So to continue, you'll click View Edit. And you see the budget that you've already started typing. So now it's time to upload that signed, scanned request form. And you'll browse for the file. We'll just choose any random file and say it's the signed request form. And then upload. And this will have a date stamp on it, so you'll know exactly what day it was uploaded. You don't have to put that in the document description. I will also mention that if you are doing an accompanying purchase request, you will need to upload the accompanying documentation for that purchase, such as an invoice or a quote. If it's a subcontract, a copy of the subcontract with the signed request form. You can upload as many documents to this page as you would like. So now you're going to click back to the Amend button, and watch what this does. This is another problem that we're seeing. Coordinators don't know that you have to certify that the signed request form has been uploaded to the page, which is a requirement. So once you click that, you'll see the Submit button, and click Submit. And at this point, your RPM just received an email that you have submitted a budget amendment. If you go back to your budget tab, you'll now see Amend 1 submitted, and you'll also see where you made that attachment. And now you're just waiting on your RPM's approval. When they approve, the status will say approved. If they were to request more information, you'll get an email requesting some more information to include with your budget amendment, and then you'll just go back into it, make the needed adjustment, and then submit again. I hope this helps.
So that sounded like a lot of information, but no fear, because everything is listed step by step in your user's guide. If you are going to do a budget amendment, I urge you to go to the FRYSC Counts User's Guide to page 24. And if you are going to do a purchase request, those instructions are in the User's Guide starting on page 30. If you ever get nervous about this and need a walkthrough on how to do a budget amendment or a purchase request, please email me and I will walk you through that process as many times as it takes. And I really do mean that. You will never bother me by emailing me. I'll be happy to pick up the phone, call you, and walk you through it and make sure that you're comfortable with this process. This is not something that you do every day, so it is not unusual that you wouldn't remember exactly how to do all of the steps. So either use the user's guide or give me a call. And is that all I'm supposed to talk about on this? Now we will go back to Teresa for the quiz, correct?
Lisa's going to do the quiz.
Okay, so before we quiz you, let's do a little recap because I see a lot of questions in the box about the $500 single purchase. And is that, so if I bought, 500 pencils or let's say I bought 500 pencils and my total was $525. That is not a single item. It is a single item, but you're buying many pencils. So it is not, you don't do a request for that. Now, if you bought so many of one item that your total is 1,000 or over, then you would do a request. So the $500 limit, just to recap, is one single item. So like if you bought a laptop and it was $625, you would need to do a request. If you were buying, backpacks for your Jumpstart program and your total was going to be $1,100, you would need to do a request for that because that's over 1,000. Okay, so let's take a quiz, and what we'll do is we're going to use our chat box, and I'm going to copy this totally from our new RPM wheel and have you, when I say ready, set, go, you're going to type yes or no in the chat box, okay? So the first question, don't type anything till I say go, is you want to purchase a desk and the cost is $350. Do you need a purchase request for that? Ready, set, go. Excellent. I'm seeing a whole bunch of no's, and that is exactly right. No, because it is under that $500 limit. All right, next question, reset. You need to purchase this desk using furniture and fixtures, and you don't have this code listed in your original budget. Do you need to do an amendment? Ready, set, go. Can't trick you all, even at the end of a very long day. Excellent. Yes, you do need an amendment. Remember, anytime you are adding a munis code that you haven't originally had in your budget, you need to do an amendment. All right, next slide, please. You have $1,500 in your budget to hire a school-based therapist to come see students 1 day a week. Do you need a request? Ready, set, go. A little bit slower there, but yes. Yes, they did hesitate. Remember, we said any purchase totaling $1,000 or more or a subcontract, you would do a request. So yes, you are correct. You do need a request for this. Let's reset. You want to purchase teen pregnancy prevention curriculum, and the cost is $695. Do you need a purchase request for this? Ready, set, go. Good. That's kind of a tricky question because some people are like, well, the curriculum and the books that go with it are two separate things, but no, it's a curriculum. It's all together. Usually you buy it prepackaged. So you are correct, everyone. You need a request for that. Next, okay, perfect. Next question, we will reset. Red Ribbon Week is coming up and you are purchasing prizes, brochures, and incentives from Positive Promotions in the amount of $1,100. Do you need a purchase request? Ready, set, go. And it is, yes, you do, because you are purchasing over $1,000. Remember, if you were only purchasing one item, or if the amount was under 1,000, you would not need to do that purchase request. But because it is over 11 or over 1,000, you do. Another thing, we would ask you not to do to get by with that is to do a couple different orders. Like if you're doing 2 orders at the same time and your total is going to be, like, let's say you have 2 purchase orders, one's for $500, one's for $600, and they're both on the same date to positive promotion. That would be something that a monitor would probably say, you were doing that so you didn't have to do a purchase request, and that's not okay. So just keep that in mind. Okay, reset. You have $500 in your travel code on your original budget. You decide to attend a couple additional trainings during the year that were job related, and you realize that you've spent a total of $650 in that code. Do you need to do an amendment? Ready, set, go. Think we had a couple false starts, but that's okay because our answers are all correct. Yes, because that is more than 10% of the original code amount, you would need to do a budget amendment. Now, if your total spent was less than $550, you would not need to do an amendment because it would fall under that 10% or less than $100. And one other thing is when you're doing your budget amendments, what I would recommend, and I tell all my coordinators to do this, is once you get your amendment approved and you send your new budget to your finance people so that they know how to change your munis codes, the next month you need to pull and really look at your detailed munis report and make sure that those corrections have been made, because a lot of times you will make those corrections or make that budget amendment and send it, but it never gets made, and if you're not double checking it, you'll miss it.
Yeah,
All
it's
right.
that revised budget column that's on that munis report. That's what it's labeled. So you need to make sure that's one of the things that you should do every time you balance your budget, is make sure those amounts match your original budget or your current approved budget.
All right, so next slide, we're going to get into a little bit about how can we spend FRYSC dollars and what is restricted or prohibited. So the first item we're going to talk about is T-shirts. A lot of people say, wait a minute, I do T-shirts for my Girls on the Run program or for this. It's okay for your student programs for that are in your action components, but you can't buy T-shirts for like your whole 9th grade class, as like if let's say your whole 5th grade was going on a field trip and the school decided they wanted every 5th grader to wear a red shirt that said Breckenridge Elementary. You can't provide that because that's not a FRYSC program. Okay. Anything that's supplanting. So if the school has previously been paying for it, then it's not something that they can come to you and say, hey, we want you to pay for this now. That's not okay. Like agendas, textbooks, software for classroom use, those are all things that your school funds are supposed to be covering, and FRYSC funds are not to be used for that. Classroom supplies that are not related to FRYSC action components. Field trips, and this is a lot of if it is a FRYSC sponsored field trip, like you're taking kids to the clothing store, or you have this program and you guys are going to do this field trip because of this program, then that is okay. But field trips for grade levels, classes, and things like that, you're not allowed to use your FRYSC funds for. You can't purchase like classroom sets of iPads or Chromebooks or things like that. Those are not a good way to use your money. Past due fees for school lunches and library. A lot of this stuff will apply to things that are restricted in the KRA that I'm going to share with you a little bit soon. But school one-call systems, catering, teacher appreciation lunches, that goes back to what Sherry was talking about earlier in a presentation. You know, this is supposed to be student-centered, and so you really need to think about it's not okay to buy teacher lunches and things like that. And we are also prohibited from purchasing incentives for attendance. Okay. Capital construction. You can't take most centers don't have enough money to like build a building, but you can't take your money and, you know, use it for capital construction or pay a consultant to do some grant writing services for you. We're not allowed to use FRYSC funds for drug testing or auditing services or leasing or purchasing of vehicles. So that means if you're going to a conference and, you know, you can't lease a vehicle to go to a conference, right? Rent to own acquisitions is not allowable, or employment of school level administration, administrative coordination, or supervision. So that's a lot of no's. Okay, so let's get to how do we think about how we can spend our money. These you should, and as a coordinator, when I was brand new, I had these questions taped right up behind my computer because it wasn't just something that was ingrained in my memory as it was later on, but guiding questions to ask for your expenses. Is it tied to student learning? Is it in your FRYSC action components? Because if you're spending money on a program or an activity or supplies, it really should be in your program plan. Does it meet FRYSC mission, goals, and service delivery model? Is it limited by the contract? And we're going to have a session on the contract and what it says later on tomorrow. Is this something that the school or district would be purchasing anyway? If that answer is yes, if you're not going to buy it, somebody at the school is already going to pay for it, then the answer should be no. Don't waste your FRYSC funds. And does it fall under KAR guidelines for fee waivers? There are specific guidelines that you are that schools are supposed to have processes for. And let me see, I think I have the link here. And I'm going to put it in the chat so you can pull that document up. Schools are not allowed to charge free and reduced lunch students for specific things. And they also have to have a process in place by which they're going to waive those fees. Okay, so that document that I'm sharing in section 1 talks about that they have to have a process in place to waive the fees for any student who qualifies for free or reduced lunch. If you go down to section 4, you'll see that they also have to waive fees for certain things. Like they can't charge students for field trips if they qualify for free and reduced lunch. That's why a lot of times they will come to you and say, hey, we know FRYSC money is for, you get paid for those free and reduced lunch kids. Why can't you pay for this field trip? Well, because by KAR, they have to have a process in place where those field trips get paid for. They're not allowed to charge students free and reduced lunch students for graduation fees or general activity fees, anything like that. And you can see that whole list, but section 5 talks about where the waiver of fees does not apply. And number 1 is activities that are used outside of a normal 6-hour school day. So if you have a trip, maybe your school is organizing a trip to Greece, a free and reduced lunch student can't those fees for that trip cannot be waived because that is outside of a 6-hour school day. So if they want to participate in that, they would need to go. And then costs for materials, equipment, supplies beyond those necessary for their courses. So if they're in a math class and one of those high fancy, high functioning calculators is suggested but not required, they don't have to provide that. They don't have to waive the fee for that. But really, the most important thing to keep in mind is if a legislator or anyone actually asked you to justify the purchase as an appropriate FRYSC expenditure, would you be able to do so? That should be, that's first and foremost. Can you justify this expense to anybody that came in and looked at your budget to say, yes, this is tied to student learning, or it meets my program plans, or it falls in line with our mission and our goals? All right, next slide. I think
Questions.
that we have finished, so we're going to open it up for questions.
And I tried to answer questions as I saw them.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So I work for Jefferson County, and we start back to classes on Wednesday. Prior to, we had a board meeting about 2 weeks ago. The superintendent had mentioned that the school district FRCs were going to provide water bottles for all students. Prior to that, one of my schools asked, would I be able to purchase water bottles? Now that, and then we had a all-staff FRYSC meeting, I believe it was last week, and our manager mentioned that they were working with the Louisville Water Company to provide water bottles. Now that those will be provided, am I not allowed to purchase water bottles for the school?
But if they're going to be provided, why do you need to purchase them? I'm sorry, I missed.
Because from my understanding, what they told us, they're not going to give us enough for all the students. It's just it seemed like it was just kind of what they could come up with. So if we have 200 students coming back to school, they may only be able to provide us 60 water bottles, which are not enough for all in-person students. So would I be allowed to still purchase water bottles? Or would the school have to purchase it now?
I think from the district level, we would consider it supplanting because the district's going to have to provide those bottles. They're the ones who have decided that, they can't use the water fountains, and it's sort of like providing PPE. We're not supposed to be doing that for everybody in the school building. We might provide a little bit for our offices. So there's not really anything wrong with you having a few water bottles to hand out to the student who forgot theirs today or who didn't bring it back when they took it home. But I'm pretty sure across the district level, we aren't going to approve a whole school-wide purchase for that.
Okay, that's what they want, a school-wide purchase.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have purchased water bottles, like the reusable water bottles for programs, and then had the extras to give out, but I always tried to make sure that I also had it with the FRYSC logo and my phone numbers that you could contact me. So it was kind of a twofold thing, but I would never purchase them for the whole school.
I have a question. If I'm planning on doing a summer camp, I thought about buying T-shirts and doing a tie-dye activity just for summer camp. Is that okay?
That's okay. Yeah. That's one of the programs that you're sponsoring as part of your camp, and that is fine. What we find lots of times is people will say, we need, T-shirts for the whole 9th grade because they're in freshmen. Or just like kindergarten. Yeah. Yeah, you're using that as a specific program and activity that you're doing. So those T-shirts are fine. T-shirts for groups that you work with, like youth groups, or a group of kids that you use for leadership, or you use them to mentor younger kids, or these are kids that do programming. They're part of a program that you have at FRYSC or your YSC. Then those are fine to purchase those T-shirts. It's when we get asked to buy one for everybody in the school.
Right. We don't take care of the whole population. I got it.
Right. It's what you're working with. Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
So does that go for uniforms as well? My students wear uniforms, and I'm in Jefferson County, so they are coming back on Wednesday. And while we were able to modify the uniform policy, my principal is still requiring those students to wear uniforms. So I have been asked to purchase uniforms for the whole school. So how would that work?
You mean to have like extra in your office for people that don't have it? Or you?
For every student to have a uniform that's coming back to in-person learning.
Did they not have uniforms before? Were they not required to wear uniforms before?
They were.
I would say, you can have some in your office for extras, and you can, if you have a few students that, truly the parent reaches out and says, I can't afford it. But, you're going to have kids in your school that can't afford to have a uniform or buy a uniform. So really, there's no reason for you to purchase uniforms for every child.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be for you to have extra in case somebody needed one. And also remember that in those bylaws, you should have some type of guideline or criteria about your basic needs. And I'm sure if uniforms was something they've purchased in the past or something that's been required in the past, there's probably some notation to that. And as always, remember, if you have any questions or doubts, please ask your RPM. They will give you the advice and stuff that you need. So please make sure that you ask them. But no, you shouldn't purchase everybody in the building a uniform, because like Lisa said, there's going to be people that don't need you to do that. But you will have some kids that probably need one or two. And you'll always need extras for accidents and stuff. And looking at some of the questions that people typed, somebody mentioned that when they went to open up that budget Excel spreadsheet, that it asked for a password. So I'm not sure if where we put the link in the chat, maybe it didn't work out, but just remember that it is on the website. You can download it from the website if that link didn't help.
Teresa, I'll respond to that. I think that was going from the Training Hub link, and I believe that that documents a view only in there. So my recommendation, if you go through the Training Hub and look at that you do like a save as. Like you can click on it and it should open in a new window. It should, maybe that's where it's asking for the password. But if all else fails, go to the website, right? The FRYSC website where you can download it there. I just know that I can't change the permissions on it on the Training Hub.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't been able to figure it out. Maybe I'll work on that a little bit this evening. See if I can get it to work.
We did have a question about what about purchasing chargers for Chromebooks? I guess my question would be, is it your center Chromebook? If it's the school's Chromebook, no. I mean, if it's classroom sets of Chromebooks.
No. Because that is one of the things that is provided when they buy the Chromebooks. So that's up to the district. They made that original purchase, so then they got to maintain it. Same way with your ask to repair it, pay for repairs or cracked screen or whatever. They purchased it. They're responsible for the fixes for anything that goes along with it. It would be supplanting asking you to cover those costs.
That wasn't my question, but to piggyback on it, my district has a policy where they had our remote students, they signed it out, and the form that they signed said if there's a damage to it, I'm responsible. So for families who generally could not afford to pay those, is that something that we would then help them with, or is that just the school has to, hey, figure it out?
The school would need to have a policy or procedure in place to how to handle that if they have someone that can't pay for the fee or whatever it is to check out, to have the Chromebook or whatever the device is. It's up to the district to make allowances for that. It's not, we wouldn't be able to cover those costs. Because you got to think of it this way, even though it's a Chromebook, it's just like a textbook. That's part of the school. I mean, that's part of class work. They have to provide that for their students. If they're requiring kids to use a computer, one-on-one devices, then that's what they've got to provide. It's just like a textbook.
And it falls back to that KAR document. It's part of what's required for them to do their schoolwork. So that falls, they're supposed to have a process in place to pay for that if that child's a free and reduced lunch student.
Yeah. And one of the questions that was in the chat box, just wanted to point it out in case anybody didn't look at it. When we say 10% over or under, we're talking about each line item, each munis code. So it's 10% food over or under, it's 10% travel. It's not as a collective whole. So remember that somebody had asked the question of, that if they had a few dollars left over from each code that added up to 200, could you then take that total and use it for a single purchase? And, as long as that, you're going to have money left over or under in individual codes, as long as it's not more than 10% and you've got $200 left over and you tie that PO to a code that, $200 doesn't make you over 200%, 10% or under 10%, then yeah, that would be fine. You would take that and make whatever purchase you need, whatever it needed to be $200. You just have to be careful that whatever code you attach that PO to, you don't cause it to go over 10%. And FRYSC money, FRYSC allocation, yeah, this is how we want you to maintain the record for your FRYSC allocation. But if you have funds, which are fundraiser funds, or they are those types of things, donation money, monetary, money that you receive through donation, you still have to maintain records. Some of you all may participate in programs like Children Incorporated, or where kids actually get a monthly amount. Anything that brings in you're bringing in any funds like that, you still want to maintain your financial records just like you do your FRYSC dollars. They're kept separate, but you want to have a budget balance sheet. You want to have some way that you're monitoring the funds, and then you're reconciling that against whether it's an activity report from your school secretary or it's a munis report. You still want to make sure that you reconcile that and keep those funds separate, and that you are following what the intent is for those funds. We won't ask you for reports from them. We will view them when the RPM does site visits and monitoring visits, but there's not anything that you'll actually turn into the division, but you still maintain those records just like you do your FRYSC allocation. And so when we clarified the single item. Let's see what else is in here. I'm just making sure we're missing any more of those. Are all the quizzes, yes and no's.
While Teresa's looking through those, I want to point out one more thing that's really great about putting questions in the chat, because while those different folks were sharing who was doing the lead, being able to answer those questions in the chat is a great way. So please, 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 as we continue doing that. Did you find anything else, Teresa?
I didn't see any other, because the other questions referred back to the about the water bottles and then the uniform. I think those were taken care of.
All right. Any more questions for the budget team?
Don't forget, when it's out, always ask your RPM.
Yeah, I actually had one recommendation as an outsider in this process. I know that some of these conversations are probably hard conversations as new employees, right? The principal or the, and so just lean on your RPM. They'll support you. They'll let you know what isn't allowed, and they'll help you with the right words and the tough conversation if it comes to that.
Yeah, it is no problem at all for your RPM to give an explanation as to why we can't make certain purchases, and do it in a way that falls back. We always respond back by what it says in our contract and what it says in an administrative guidebook. So that is not, never feel like you're putting us in a bad spot, because you're not. We do this all the time. A lot of us have this stuff memorized because you are not the first person to ask this question. I can guarantee you that. And we are all good about responding and making sure that we have backup, so to speak, or we can show why we're saying no. We're just not being mean and saying no. We can give you good reasons as to why we don't do that.
All right. Well, thank you all. Okay, so just a couple quick housekeeping pieces, or just kind of some final notes. One, if you haven't already done so, might be good to print out a sign and put it on your door of your office to kind of try to minimize distractions. But it looks like you guys did a great job today. I know it's been a long day. This was the longest of the 3 days. Each day gets a little bit shorter, and a lot shorter on the third day. So way to hang in there. And I know this is hard. I've been through this a couple times now, or well, like this is my second time, and it's like when you're a little bit thirsty and somebody brings a fire hose to quench your thirst. And I know it's a lot. And anyway, way to hang in there. One more quick tip, and that is the links. We've been sharing a lot of things in the chat as links. What I would recommend is, as those come up, click on them. Even if it's not something you want right then, keep clicking on those through the day. At the end of the day, you'll end up with a browser with 7 windows open, and then you can bookmark the ones that are going to pertain. I'm sorry I didn't think of that wonderful trick at the beginning of the day, but now you've got it for tomorrow. It just occurred to me in that last session. I'm like, wow, it'd be great to compile all these links. Although, like we have said, a lot of those links are available on Melissa's amazing training hub website. So a lot of that information, if you did miss a link, that is a great place to go. And I think that is it for today. We'll be starting back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. Eastern Time, 8 Central. Thanks for a great day, everybody. By the way, there's been a lot of chatter about this class. Like we said at the very beginning, we really want you to lean on each other as you go through this experience together. But this has struck all of us as a great class. We're really excited to have you with us. Get a good night's sleep, and we'll see you tomorrow.